Hello everyone and welcome back to the Milu project. Today we'll be looking at the Quechua language. Now I strongly advise watching this video to the end because this language has some really unique and bizarre idiosyncrasies. So if you find this video interesting, please consider subscribing and join us on our linguistic pilgrimage across the world, helping you to both develop more creative and unique ideas for your conlangs and utilize some ingenious techniques. Anyway, let's begin. The Quechuan language is also called Runasimi and is spoken in the countries Bolivia, Colombia, Peru, Chile, Ecuador and Argentina by roughly 9 million people. However, Quechua isn't really a language. Instead, it's actually a language family consisting of two main branches, Quechua 1 and Quechua 2. Within these groups, the languages are pretty much a dialect continuum, and despite the 1-2 division, they've diverged from each other little more than the Romance or Germanic languages have. However, for the purposes of this video, we'll be looking purely at the Cusco variety of Quechua. So let's start by looking at the phonology. While these are Quechua's sounds, it also has this affricate. But notice the absence of voice stops. Well, there's actually not much distinction between voiced and unvoiced plosives. In place of this, Quechua distinguishes between plain, aspirated, and ejective stops. These are Quechua's vowels. Interestingly though, when in close proximity to uvula sounds, they shift slightly in quality and sound more like this. Now, if you've watched our previous episode on the languages of Bolivia, you might notice some similarities between Quechua and Aymara. Well, this is due to the extensive cohabitation of the Quechua and Aymara peoples. And even though they might share many lexical similarities, if you look more carefully, you'll find that they're actually from different language families. Now it's time to look at morphology, syntax and grammar. Well, firstly, Quechua is an agglutinative language. This means that words are made out of morphemes, which can have many affixes attached to them. Though, importantly, these affixes must be able to be used in multiple situations, because not doing so would make the language fusional. Now this system is in great contrast with English, where all the morphemes behave somewhat like islands, and it's left to the speaker to connect the entities together. Now, in Quechua, agglutination is mostly applied through suffixes, instead of prefixes. This is particularly evident in the verbs. Here you can see how regular the conjugations are, and the way suffixes are added to verbs to change the tense and person. Although, the thing is, this isn't really a very accurate depiction of Quechuan verbs, for reasons I'll talk about later. Now even though some of those suffixes look like tense markings, it's important to remember that Quechua is not fusional, and so each suffix only has one meaning. And in Quechua, only really the past is marked, with this suffix, which I'm not even going to try pronouncing. This means that the present and future are usually unmarked, as shown here. There is also a past habitual and pluperfect tense, as well as numerous modalities. But what about nouns? Well, Quechua has a system of grammatical cases. Here are the suffixes for the singular forms, and here are the ones for the plural. Now these markers aren't tied to the nouns as much as in Latin, for example, and so they don't need to go right next to them. However, the suffixes still need to be at the end of the noun phrase. These suffixes, however, don't agree nouns to adjectives. Anyway, here's an example of how you'd decline kuna, meaning house. Here it means at the houses. Here are the pronouns. Notice that there are actually 7. This is because Quechua uses something called clusivity to help distinguish between 2 different types of we. The inclusive is used when referring to both you and the listener, and the exclusive is used when referring to oneself and someone outside of the conversation, not the listener. Now, syntactically speaking, Quechua is a subject, object, verb language. However, in practice, it actually has 3 word order. The only real rule being that in subordinate clauses, the verb must occur after the subject and the verb. Now, let's look at a few unique things which Quechua does. The first is bipersonal conjugations. Now remember earlier on when I said that the conjugation table wasn't exactly correct? Well, that's because in Quechua, verbs need to agree with both the subject and the object. Quechua also does something called evidentiality marking. This means that it's necessary for a speaker to declare how they know something. To do this, speakers of Quechua rely on these 3 markers, which represent these situations. Quechua also uses topic particles, which indicate a speaker's feelings towards an action and who benefits from it, which is a really cool feature. And the language has many more interesting features, such as the way that speakers of Quechua view time. In Quechua, the past is perceived as in front of you, and the future as behind you. The Aymara people also have a very similar view of time, so definitely check that video out if you'd like to find out the origins of this metaphor. As well as that, Quechua has a very rich system of morphological derivation, and as I've mentioned, its intensive case system allows it to have 3 word order. And finally, these are some of the words which we get from Quechua. Quite cool, isn't it? Anyway, that's all for this week. Make sure to tune in next week for our first video in our series on the languages of Mars. As always, feel free to leave any future video suggestions or questions down below in the comments. And I'll see you next week.